Oh, hey guys. Today we're doing a walk with a wildlife tracker. He's a guide. He's going to take us on a guided tour and show us different tracks. Whoa, look at this one. Look at the size of this compared to my hand. I think that's a wolf. I have timber wolves here. Look at those claw marks in there, if you can see that from the other angle. There's a triangular shaped pad and the claws up in the front.
Water that kind of dripped off of here. You can see, the more rounded dots. There are some elongated spots, various small birds moving through here, juncos and other sparrows. I'm not going to get into these right now. There's better spots we can look at them if we want to. But what I did want to talk more about is some activity happening in here. So if you take a look at like this stick, or there's some right here, I can break some and pass it around. Tell me what you maybe notice about how it is cut. Sharp? Yeah. Very distinct angle to it? And a good angle. Yeah. Thoughts on who might be doing that? Who might be feeding on ends of branches around here? Sharp teeth nipping off the ends of them?
Rabbits.
Rabbit would be a good one. Squirrel? For us here.
Don't eat it.
Regarding scat, by the way, obviously, first of all, at your own discretion, touching, handling it. In general, most scats from wildlife are not particularly dangerous to handle. Again, please wash your hands afterwards, because there can be various pathogens on them. The only one that is in North America, or at least in Minnesota, that's known to potentially be more dangerous is raccoon, because they can carry a parasitic roundworm in their scat. Kind of overall identifying characteristics, very round, usually with a slightly, this is where I'm going to use my bare hand, slightly flattened profile. I've heard some people compare it to a Skittle. It's round, but it's like flattened, right? And when you look at the texture, it's quite fibrous, like kind of wood shavings. There are a couple different ways that herbivores can digest things. Deer and cows, for example, are ruminants, so they're going to eat that food initially. They've got a multi-chambered stomach, and then it comes back up and they chew their cud, and then it breaks down again. It takes longer that way. What rabbits do is they eat whatever they're eating. It goes to it first time, not fully digested, so there's still lots of useful material in there, and rather than bring it back up that way, they reach down and they put it back in their mouth and eat it again. So this is the second time through, and there's very little material that an animal could get from here at this point. Unlike deer, where deer will, tail goes up and the pellets fall out like a little dispenser, rabbits actually do single droppings at a time. So it's not uncommon to see them more scattered. In cases like back here, and it might be a little hard to see mixed with other stuff, but there's whole piles of it back there, which can lead us to conclude that rabbits were hanging out there for a while. They've got a pretty sheltered space right here.
So when you see a pile, it just means they've been there for a while.
Yeah. Great horns, more so than barred, although barred can too. Red-tailed hawks, various other hawks. They also feed a lot on smaller things like voles and mice too. I'm trying to think.
Eagles?
Eagles will, yeah.
They prefer fish, I think.
Yeah, and they also feed a lot on like roadkill this time of year. They certainly would eat them, but from what I have seen, they don't tend to as actively hunt them as much as some of like our slightly smaller hawks that may be a little more agile going after them too. But I have no doubt that eagles have killed any number of rabbits before. So eating is if you're having trouble seeing it, or even if you think you're seeing it well, try looking from different angles as sort of a general rule of thumb. Having the track between you and the sun, so like looking at these would be ideal for me. Sometimes it works better to shade them out, or sometimes it works better to shade them out and then hit them with like a different light source. So it seems kind of weird. It's like, well, there's already light, but the angle of the light really matters too. So. Yeah, pretty small because we're looking at
Hardly indented in this.
yeah.
Could it be trolls?
Notice it's sort of like a relatively continuous line. Maybe a little bit of like a staggered spacing of like 2, 2, 2.
So, can you tell the front feet from the back?
Not necessarily here, and what can get tricky with the front versus hind is, and it depends on the gait and how the animal's moving, but it's commonly you will get a hind track or hind foot that lands where that front foot was before, so you actually get both tracks kind of within there. So in some of these, and actually I suspect most of these impressions actually contain 2 footprints. They're just too indistinct at this point, both because of the size as well as how it's sort of aged in the snow here. But there's probably 2 feet in there. So as that animal was, say, moving, if these are my front feet, these are my back feet, as it's moving, they kind of like landed like that. So, I mean, we can look at like lefts, rights here. There are some sections where it becomes a bit more narrow and a little bit more even spacing than some of these groups of 2. So my eye, what looks like sort of like a little bit of like a bounding, like slightly leaping here, but what might be happening here is more of what we would like call a trot. You think of it as sort of like a jog. It's a little bit slower here, and it's kind of this like continuous pattern. You don't tend to see them out and scurrying around as much on the surface, but our snow's not very deep right now. As I mentioned, inside, track patterns can be really helpful. John, the author of this book here, calls a scurrying pattern, and feel free to come take a look closer, or if you grabbed a copy of the book, it's page 310. So like some of these pairs of 2s, and they can get quite messy. They also will, here's their trot. These sort of like paired groupings, and typically they're going to be over a shorter distance when there's deeper snow.
It's a turkey.
Turkey, pheasant, primarily on the ground, spend lots of time walking. Their front 3 toes are the most well developed, and what you tend to see, their back toe is quite reduced, and it commonly in tracks you won't see that back toe, or it will be very indistinct because of sort of the angle here and the depth of the snow. Just those 3 right there, whereas our perching birds or songbirds will tend to have generally a longer back toe.
Looking at these tracks, can you tell whether or not they were just like jaunting around, or if they were running away from something at all, or?
The lengths between steps or strides can indicate how they were moving.
Sure.
I don't have those measurements off the top of my head for a turkey, but if I think about a turkey walking, and also how narrow this trail is, because generally as animals start moving faster, their trail width gets narrower. Like if you want to test it out, try walking through some snow and then run next to it, and your feet get a little bit more in line. This was probably moving at a little bit faster pace here. I don't know if it was full on fleeing, but it seemed like kind of long steps for them if they're just doing sort of their casual exploratory walk. It seemed like it was moving a bit quicker here. Maybe something spooked it, and they'll run for a short distance and then stop. I don't feel super confident in calling those from what I can see, but they did catch those, and it's like, oh, is there something I can pull out from that? But
It's a lot lighter, isn't it?
yeah. So we got white-tailed deer here, buck, relatively young. A couple ways we can determine that. If you look at the teeth quality overall, like some of them are still fairly white, and they're really just not that worn down. There's still some fairly sharp edges to those molars. antlers are not that big. There are some specific ways with like when certain teeth show up, you can get a little bit more detailed in aging, but I would say a few years old, like 2 to 3, just on quick initial glance. If anyone knows more about aging deer skulls, feel free to chime in. Picked pretty clean here. Found it kind of in the wetland. I was probably not going to take us out there because it's a bit of tromping unless anyone is like, yes, please, let's go out there. Life for deer is hard. Deer historically were not as common in Minnesota. They're more of a southern species. They still did show up in southern Minnesota, but we were more dominated by moose, elk, and woodland caribou. Moose and elk can still be found in the state. Elk in just very small populations, mostly in the northwest. And woodland caribou, you have to go up into Ontario to find those now. Main factors contributing to that were changing forest type, with colonization and settling and clearing of forest and logging. That is environments that are more conducive to white-tailed deer existing than moose and some of those other critters that generally prefer more mature, intact forests. Obviously they do survive, and they survive quite a bit farther north. But there's decent mortality from cold and starvation. As we get later into the winter here, and they're generally a bit more weekend, especially bucks who during the rut probably ate almost no food because they were just pumped full of testosterone and thinking about nothing else but fighting and finding a female. They lose a lot of weight around then, and then that can make winter harder. So they also become more vulnerable to predators. The main predator around here, besides people, would be coyotes. In general, coyotes tend not to hunt adult deer until they're pretty weakened, so like later in the year. Like other predators and opportunistic animals, bears and bobcats and other things, you know, they'll more readily go after fawns. For most animals in the wild, if you get through that first year, that's a good start for you. A lot of animals don't make it past their first year. So it's very possible this was killed by a coyote. Again, we found out in this wetland area we get lots of coyotes traveling through here. This is Rice Creek running through here. The quality of the ice varies, but it's typically solid enough for coyotes to be trotting and moving along there. So it's very possible this was a weakened deer, but it could have just died and been scavenged onto. This is surprisingly not broken apart very much. Coyotes compared to wolves don't have super strong teeth, so they don't eat as much bone and such, but they will drag their prey around. I would almost expect a little bit more breaking apart here, so I'm not totally sure what happened to this, especially with lack of other evidence. But
It's a very nice specimen.
Any idea that's from scavenging?
that's a good question. I'm not. Well, and there's this.
Is there like a crack or something?
Yeah, you know, I'm not quite sure on that. I'm wondering if like we cleared some of the tissue here, what we might see. Might have to take a look at her. I don't recognize that.
There's your pole.
So clean, that
Yeah.
hole. But yeah, it's gonna throw me off. One interesting kind of identifying feature: if you find fur outside and not necessarily attached to the critter from which it came, deer fur is usually pretty distinct for identifying. It often has a little bit, it's sort of like a slightly crinkled texture. That part can be a little bit fine to see. And because it is hollow, as you start to bend it, it will, at some point here, kink and make this sharp 90-degree bend there. You'd sort of do the same thing with a straw, and squirrel fur, rabbit fur, other things will not do that unless you like really pinch and squeeze it. But pretty distinct for deer fur. So you could find, you know, a couple stray hairs around, you could possibly identify it. This is probably the clearest one that I'm seeing initially. just gonna put it on you all a little bit. What do you all notice? Some pads in there. Your straight line of the tracks themselves. Yeah, very linear, narrow trail, and that even spacing.
Aren't they more like a padded foot rather than hooves? Or no?
Yeah. So I'm not. What I'm seeing is it looks like, yes, like individual pads in there rather than like the cleaves or those toes on a deer. This track to me looks like there's a slightly larger triangle here in the back. There's this raised middle section that makes kind of an X shape. We call it, when you have that raised material in there in a track, we call that the negative space. So if you think about, like, if you put your own hand down, you know, we have this a little bit of a hollow in our palm depending on how flat you lay your hand. This is that negative space, and here it's a negative space that makes an X, and then toe on the outside, and then a little bigger thing here. It's a little hard to tell, but these are two separate toes. Maybe the hint of a nail mark on this side from what I can see. The toes are relatively prominent, and this triangle in the back, which would be a heel pad, is relatively small in proportion to the overall size of the track. So this puts us in the canines. So of our canines, and they're dominant in their tracks compared to felines, so members of the cat family, which can look similar to, but cats have relatively large pads as a proportion of their tracks. Canines have relatively small pads. Dogs can be tricky because there's huge variation in dog feet, not only just in terms of size, but in their foot structure. There's actually recognized by like the American Kennel Association different foot structure types. Some have more webbing, some have more like tight toes for, you know, like active herding and other things. Quite small. If we look at gray wolf, tracks in here for the most part are roughly life-sized. There can be a lot of variation, but quite a bit bigger. They tend to have a little bit more splay in their toes, like we see in many domestic dogs too, which makes sense with domestic dogs being descendant from gray wolves. Now, when you're measuring tracks, you want to be careful with, typically these measurements are based off the track floor. The way you can think about that is, think about if you step out of a pool or out of the shower or something and you left a wet footprint behind that you can see, like that's just like the actual part of your foot contacting it. But if you step in snow or soft sand, there's sort of that impression that forms around it. And if you measure that, suddenly those tracks become a lot bigger, right? So if I measure this one as carefully as I can without damaging it, and most of these measurements are without claws, but you know, check your different guides. This one's at about 2.5. So on the upper end for fox, so still a candidate. And then coyotes are quite common around here too. Typically looking at 1 3/4 to 3 inches, depending on the front or hind. And as much as it would be nice if it were the case, tracks do not always look exactly as illustrated in a field guide. But if we compare what we can see with this coyote versus red fox, what are things we might expect to see differently in the tracks besides just overall size, with coyote being a little bit bigger?
The shape.
The shape? Can you say more about that?
Well, the coyote one looks wider.
Yeah, so generally a little bit wider. Yep.
Yeah.
They'll tend to have more, just more
rounder.
Yeah. A little.
Impression on the backside.
Yeah, a more robust appearance. Like those toes are quite distinct. On the fox, they tend to be more indistinct. And that has to do with their foot structure. If you were to take a look at a fox foot, it is covered with hair. Think like a rabbit foot. So those pads are only partially exposed, and their heel is kind of in more of like a crease or a callus. So you tend to get more of this line in there rather than a full triangular pad in there. This is a pretty distinct triangular pad here, and pretty clear toes. It's a little bit less distinct up here, but just fairly robust overall. So this would be an example of coyote here. So
cool.
Coyote tracks. This would be roughly hip to shoulder length on a mammal, and roughly its shoulder height.
Wow.
With variation depending on the animal. You know, deer are a little bit longer legged, coyotes, you know, kind of medium to shorter, and, you know, variation from within there. When it's in a trot, and a trot is sort of like a jog, and they're moving opposite feet sort of in synchronization, you're looking more at this distance here from hip to shoulder. Now, it's a little bit on the smaller side for a coyote, and I would say also for the size of these tracks in particular, but I think there's a little bit of like transition and speed here, so it gives you kind of a loose sense. It's a little bit more oval rather than the like slightly heart or triangular shape of a deer, so it leads me more towards this being canine. And given the softer nature of their foot versus like deer cleaves, the fact that I'm seeing less features in here kind of makes sense for them too. I mean, you know, just as tracks get old and age, like they lose detail anyway, but deer will tend to leave clear tracks, you know, within a given substrate, and especially when you get some like crusty stuff like this.
Oh, they're cleaves, not
You know,
hooves.
if you have more pads, you're not going to see as much detail as you would like those cleaves. So I think this is still our coyote gallop. Starting to move like a little bit faster, but because of how compact the groups are and how close they are, like, you know, this animal is not jumping, running like big distances between here, so they can gallop, and you can see some dogs too where they kind of gallop at sort of like a slower speed. It's just their body is moving like, you know, I could be walking and moving my legs like this, but taking really short steps, right? As we get up here further, we'll see it picks up speed a little bit more. We get more space between the groups. But yeah, switching into vote for a gallop, where you get these more distinct separate groups of tracks. So. Cool. Trail over here. See if I can find a spot where we can get to it.
Wonder what it is.
And you're welcome to keep coming in, but I'm actually following the trail back out. If it takes a little effort, I picked up and obviously stepping on it. But this is a body slide. It kind of looks like a person came in here with something, but this is from this animal. It's an animal that, when traveling overland
Must
in
like
snow,
skiing.
likes to slide on its belly, and it's not a kindergartner who also they like to do that.
Is it a turtle?
It is not a turtle, but with turtles you tend to get the shell, the carapace on the bottom, like it get dragged through there. This is something that'd be happy to eat a turtle, although it's not its main food source. Beavers are so it's an aquatic animal like a beaver. Beavers are eating wood.
Muskrat or possum or gopher?
I'm gonna say otter.
Yeah, river otter.
Wow.
So these tracks are a little bit long, but if you come over here, and we can maybe see if we can the trail does pick up over there. They have pretty distinct toes. They have 5 toes on both their front and hind feet. Their hind tracks are very asymmetrical, kind of like our own hands, where that thumb, or what we call toe 1, is dropped down quite a bit, and sometimes that won't show up, and just the 4 other toes will, and it looks a lot like a canine track.
Otters maybe live in wetlands. Is that right?
Well, so this trail started at our dock way down that way, and then goes through here, and what I can only assume is it went out into the creek out here, so it's not open water. So, sorry, were you asking a question too?
A fella down there.
Oh, this one is going this way. The toes are in the front here. This is from 2 days ago, so they're a little bit faded. Pads back here, and so like a hind track like this right here. Again, if you lost that toe right there in the track, like that could look pretty canine or maybe even feline. but they tend to have sort of an arc to their toes, and the pads tend to have a bit of an arc. The front tracks are a bit more symmetrical overall. And when they are traveling overland, they've got short legs, long, skinny bodies. It's almost like they're built for swimming or something.
I didn't know they could get like this wide of a body.
So this is big, and there's probably been a little bit of expansion with like warming and some refreezing here. That's something that can happen with tracks too, because I mean it wasn't super warm the last couple of days, but it was warm enough that there was some melt. But it was close to this. This is probably a big male in the weasel family, which includes the otters. Males are quite a bit bigger. Like they can be up to like twice the weight of females. River otter, top otter. Here we go.
How do they survive the winter without water?
They're getting into the water around here. So there's open water around here year round, especially along the creek. And then they will come out and explore. Muskrats also make what are called push-ups around here. They create little air pockets that the muskrats use, but I'm sure beavers use them at times. And then this one managed to find an opening out by our dock where some of that had thawed after the warm conditions. But they are going to be doing different bounding patterns like this, kind of like we were starting to see with that lope with the coyote, where there's separate groups of tracks. Often they'll do this, and I think we're seeing that group of two here. Sometimes you'll see the tracks sort of on the side. I almost think of it as like they're sort of like swimming through the snow a little bit, and they slide really well. They have that very hydrodynamic body, and again short legs, and when they're bounding they really arch and bend. They look like a slinky. They've got very flexible spines. So
cool.
This is the one I was hoping we would still find some evidence of, and it's like, oh, I hope it didn't all get trashed. But if you want to see some of the tracks in a little more detail, there's some right here. Again, there's 2 footfalls in here, but if you look, there's 1 toe, 2 toes, 3 toes, 4 toes, 5 toes, and you see how dropped down this toe is, how it makes this big curve. So this would be a left hind here, and actually it landed on a front foot too. But this really curved nature that shows up.
Well, they have claws, don't they?
Yep, they do have claws. They have webbing too. Sometimes you can pick up on the webbing a little bit more as like impressions between the toes. A little bit as if there was something slightly pressing between the toe, like webbing, but it's not super clear here. Rarely do I see the webbing so clear that it's like that. Even beavers that have webbing, a lot of times you don't see the webbing has to be like just the right conditions. But you see it, it's very indistinct.
Does it look better than sand? Like, or is it snow better?
It depends a lot on the quality of the snow, like how wet versus dry it is, how deep it is. A lot of times, snow that is fairly shallow with a hard pack underneath can be really good for seeing detail. Really deep snow can sometimes be challenging because it all just like fills in, but you need a deeper webbing tail up here. Wet sand can be really good, and mud can be really good, unless it's so wet that it fills back in right away. So there's a lot of variation in it.
So there's no like better or worse for like tracks, I guess. It's just the condition is more what matters than the snow or dirt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always so like when we're looking at the substrate, and unless anyone else wants to look closer, we can walk and talk too.
Kind of in the middle.
This is actually pretty good substrate. It was a little wet when it came down, but it's cooled enough that it's not melting out too much. I mean, some of the warmer spots on the side you could get like a little melting stuff, but and it's shallow enough in most areas that decent amount of detail will show up. And some of these are a little bit older, but in really deep snow, sometimes it just like punches through, and so much other snow falls in, or it's so bare you can't see the detail. So, or sometimes even there's deeper snow. I look for areas where it might be thinner, like along pathways and stuff. So there's some raised soil here and here, and then there's also some disturbance along it. There's at least 2 different things happening here. this soil was already slightly raised up before something disturbed it. And I had just started seeing more of this activity recently, especially around last weekend when it was warmer. These are mole tunnels. The moles, when they are feeding, the longer sections of horizontal tunnels that you'll see, those are feeding tunnels. They're looking for those earthworms, grubs, other things that are near that organic layer in the soil, near the grass or other plants. And they just use those really for that. And sometimes you'll get a little bit more slightly raised sections. Most of the time their tunnels are actually quite a bit deeper. You will get those mole hills where they have pushed soil straight up and it makes a pretty even symmetrical circle. And that's just more of like the dumping ground for all of it. Yeah, here they're not actually excavating, they're more just pushing it aside with their big like paddle-shaped front feet. And that creates that push up with it too. And they tend to be then really soft areas. They're the stuff when you know that like, oh, you kind of sink in. I see a lot of deer walk through them too. I am not quite sure if this is just from all the kids and folks we had coming through here recently snowshoe walking. I think maybe, but I don't think I see quite enough digging to suggest it would be like if a coyote might come and investigate and dig, but I would expect a bit more extensive digging with it. This looks like, I don't know, maybe it got kicked a little bit more. People were snowshoeing through here too, and they've got, the metal cleats on the bottom of the snowshoes, but so yeah, just because it doesn't seem to go real deep. Like, there's a decent amount of stuff moved, but if this was raised up here, like, like even if I were to, it was a little warmer before, but maybe something dug out a little bit, or I could see, like, if you have that snowshoe and you got those metal crampons on the bottom, you could scrape this a bit more. I would expect if a coyote were digging to, even though that's hard, to dig a bit farther into there. Gotcha. If they're really investigating it. I have seen moles that appear to have been killed by coyotes or canines or some sort of other mammal predator. They're almost never eaten. And same thing with shrews that are related to them, also insectivores. They can secrete different substances that make them taste really bad, and mammals will sometimes kill them. And I suspect it tends to be like either starving mammals or ones that are just younger and not as experienced, and then they're like, and so they'll spit them out. Owls and other raptors will eat shrews. It's rare to find one that looks to have been killed by a bird and then just left behind, but they do show up in their like pellets and scabs and such. Birds generally have a less developed sense of taste. Not a comment on their personal take on things, physical sense of taste. So they're more inclined to eat them, where mammals have a more refined sense of taste. Hence why, like, if you ever have tried to manage squirrels at bird feeders, they'll sell like suet and birdseed that has like pepper flakes and stuff in it. Because mammals, including ourselves, are more sensitive to that. Birds, it doesn't bother them as much.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, you'll find some where they put like red pepper flakes or chili peppers or stuff in there.
There was just like these couple that just keep coming back to it, and they're just like, they look like this, and they're just
they're just massive.
They're just stuffed with bird feed.
I appreciate you putting that out for them.
Yeah, but oh man.
Yeah, under our feeders here, however, it got quite soft recently, so I'm not planning to take us out here. I'm going to take a few steps out here until you get to that line right there. It's actually just sort of like wet ground here. Towards the end of the winter season, like where we are now, the ice that is out in the middle of the lake is going to be the thickest and most solid, and it's going to take a while to melt. So our softest areas show up around here, also around vegetation. So even when it's really cold out, you can get soft spots around cattails. They just don't freeze quite right, or they absorb a little extra like infrared radiation, and they make soft spots there. But so you can see where there had been some melting here, and check to see how this is right now. So there's actually a pretty solid-ish layer under here with some slush on the top. But on Tuesday, there were some distinct open holes right in here, and not very much, but enough that the water had been cruising through here managed to come right through here. So there, and other aquatic, semi-aquatic mammals are looking for similar holes this time of year. There's some spots out on the ice that are a little bit bunker, like quarter of the way out, 50 yards or so. A lot of those were spots where there was vegetation pushed up by muskrats. They push up vegetation through thinner ice and cracks, and it creates a little dome area under there that gives them little air pockets to breathe. And they tend to make them in a really long line. Basically, like take a deep breath, hold it, get to the next air pocket, take another breath, next air pocket. Otherwise, they're really limited in how far they can travel. And then, because that was a weakened spot of ice, and then also that vegetation is dark in terms of the sun, and so that started to kind of sink in. So that's going to create holes and openings out there. And then those muskrats will start sitting there, and you'll see like along the creek. If you go out like towards that Eagle Nest, there's the dam coming up Peltier Lake. You'll see muskrats sitting there and starting to feed. So a lot of these critters are looking for kind of these open patches. Coyotes love to cruise around here checking these muskrat lodges and push-ups though, because they might catch an unwary muskrat there and get a nice little meal. Otters, like the one coming through here, will eat muskrats too. It's not a major part of their diet, but they will. If they can catch it, they'll probably eat it.
How big is a muskrat?
Muskrat, not kind of the tail, it's about yay big or so. Think like bigger than a guinea pig.
About the size of a chihuahua.
Probably around there, yeah. A little bit more kind of like round, dense. I think that's kind of why I thought like guinea pig, but yeah, probably somewhere around there. Smaller than probably most cats. I know there's a lot of variation depending on how well fed the cat is. So like a rabbit could feed up here potentially, especially when we have deeper snow. That would be pushing the height for a rabbit.
That's like the Easter Bunny's ass.
But look at how much more ragged these are. Like they're torn. Sometimes you might get a little bit of like that 45-degree angle, but like the cuts before were pretty clean cut. They weren't quite sanded smooth. So something with a little rougher fighting structure teeth. Any thoughts on who might be eating some buds out here? Deer. Birds. Yeah, some birds will. Aspen buds tend to be really popular among a grouse, for example. Deer. Squirrels will feed on buds too. They tend to snip those from higher up, drop sections of branches down, and then feed on them. And they have very sharp teeth, so you get pretty clean cuts. Deer, let's see, next step. They only have those incisors, those teeth in the front, I think your apple biting teeth, on the bottom. So that skull we looked at before, it did not actually have incisors there. They have like a hardened plate. So imagine like your gums were kind of like reinforced and hardened. It's sort of a chopping board, but they don't have that double set of incisors to cut through. So they tend to rip and tear at it a bit more.
Oh, so that was deer.
This is all deer feeding. Yeah, and if you think about, like the height of a deer, like, yeah, it's around the height, they can reach up a little bit, but, their head's going to be somewhere in this range. Typically they're not going to feed on vegetation above 6 feet. That's usually about the highest they can get, even standing up on their hind legs. But usually somewhere around like our torso to head height for most of us. There's some variation in height, but around there. And yeah, because there's not a lot else they can get right now. They will also sometimes strip bark to get the cambium underneath. That's like beavers eat. But these buds are one of the tastier things and more nutritious things they can get at the moment. They actually don't taste half bad. Who wants to try it? I won't stop.
Try it.
You don't have to either.
Try it.
I would go for the ones that are more like red and full looking, not any that are more like kind of like dry and aged. And usually the ones on the end are the juiciest. I'm not saying they're amazing, but I don't know, they taste plant. This is basswood or linden tree.
Try this one. That one right there. Yeah.
Oh, mink, that's one we didn't know yet.
Yeah, we didn't see. I was hoping we might see some of them crossing down in the wetland there, but they're around here fairly regularly. But there's not like large numbers of them.
Yeah, they seem rare.
look at their foot structure, and then you look at the foot structure of apes, it's almost identical, or like shockingly similar. So that the one that has like the big thumb on it, that's actually their hind foot. So their hind foot is more similar to our like hand.
Yeah.
And then their front is more kind of that radial shape. And that thumb in the back really helps with grasping. And opossums are quite arboreal tree-dwelling species. Most opossum species live in South and Central America, and the Virginia opossum live around here is just one that has expanded quite farther north, and they're even more arboreal down there. So the fact that they have ape-like foot structure kind of makes sense.
Oh, that's crazy.
All right, we had a lot of fun hanging out with Eric and learning from the field guide. If you want to learn about tracks, subscribe. Ranger T out.